idiotic as a mask.
Okay, let's move on to talking about the economy. And David, you've been quite a heretic on Twitter because you decided to engage in the one conversation you're not allowed to have, which is talking about people's livelihoods as opposed to their lives. You can only keep one thought in your mind as far as the kind of woke far left is concerned and the Twitter mobs. You can only talk about people in life and death. You can't talk about their livelihoods. But you've been talking and starting a dialogue on how you would structure teams in a startup for how do we deal with the crisis versus how do we go back to work. So explain how you would do this if this was a startup company, if you were doing it on an entrepreneurial level, and what you think the road looks like. Let's start with San Francisco Bay Area, and then we'll extrapolate to the most acute area in America, New York.
Yeah. Well, the big question that everyone's going to be asking by the end of April is what now? Because I do think you're already seeing this in the New York data that quarantines work. But that shouldn't be a total surprise to us. Historically, quarantines have always worked. I mean, quarantines were the way that people dealt with plagues when they didn't have any technology. It's the problem is just they're incredibly costly. And if the quarantine goes on for months as our only way of dealing with the virus, then, we could be looking at a depression. So the question really is, once we've arrested the exponentiality of the virus, and I think we have to do that first. But once we've arrested the exponentiality, the big question is going to be, well, now how do we get out of this? And what I worry about is that the daily update mentality. I think it's great that our leaders are giving us these daily updates, showing that they're showing a bias for action, which I think is good. But I worry that we're not going to be ready, that this precious time that we're buying with quarantine is not going to lead to a better plan in May, because no one's really working on that plan. They're just working on sort of the triage, the immediate response, the making sure that hospitals around the country have the ventilators and beds they need, and we put in the orders.
Why is it, David, that people can't keep these two parallel processes in their mind at once? You've been attacked viciously on Twitter. The media attacks anybody who brings this up as like only caring about capitalism, when in fact, you need to do both plans. You need to figure out how people get back to their livelihoods and we avoid a depression, which would kill more people ultimately, right? I mean, I think there's consensus about that, whether it's depression or suicide, et cetera, or people not being able to feed themselves or, have nutritious food and healthcare. So why can't people put these two things in their mind at once? And then let's talk about the actual plan. If you were planning and you were the mayor of San Francisco or you were in Trump's cabinet and they said, okay, David, you make the plan for the Bay Area to go back to work. Take us through your 1, 2, 3, and then we'll throw it to Chamath.
What I would do is, I would do what I would do in a company for a product release is I'd have, in a company, I'd have a product manager for the 1.0 release and I have a different product manager for the 2.0 release, because it's very hard for somebody to be all in on two different releases, which have two different schedules. So, I think the team that we have right now that's basically concerned with the immediate response, the triage, they should keep doing what they're doing, make sure that, the country's reacting the right way, that it has all the supplies they need, that, they're berating 3M into giving us more PPE or whatever it is. But I think that there should be a separate team, kind of a czar for the 2.0 response, which should be focused on how do we create a new system that gets us out of lockdown, but doesn't re-trigger the exponentiality of the virus. And I think that person and that team should be ready to slide the new system into place in May. I don't know if it's beginning of May, end of May, or whatever, but sometime in May, they should be ready to slide that new system into place so that this precious time we're buying isn't wasted.
Give us your 1, 2, 3. 1 is masks, obviously, I would think.
Masks is a total no-brainer.
So that's number 1. Give us your 2, 3, 4, if you want to riff here a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the other elements of the plan that people keep talking about, it's rapid, ubiquitous testing. I mean, you have to have same-day results. It can't, this business of it taking 2, 3, 4 days in the lab. The problem is if someone is infected, they could be passing it on during that time. you don't isolate them in time. So we have to have massive, ubiquitous same day testing along with contact tracing, so that when you do find out that somebody's got it, you can not isolate not just them but all of their contacts. That's a system that seems to have worked in South Korea. I mean, those seem to be the pillars.
And is quarantining the high risk during this first phase of the rollout with testing, social distancing, and masks? That seems to be the no-brainer. I would add fourth bullet point, which is if you're obese, diabetic, asthma, or some combination of those and over 60 or over 60, you got to stay home now, and you cannot be in touch with anybody who's out and about and part of that first wave to go back to society.
Right. We know that certain segments of the population are at much higher risk than others. And so part of having a more fine-tuned response to the virus, other than just shutting everything down, would say, well, let the people who are at very, very low risk go back out, still wearing masks and having the right protocols and hygiene and all that stuff. But you keep the high risk population isolated rather than shutting